Welcome back. As a fundamentalist Mormon, having 5 parents and 44 brothers and sisters was the norm for Calvin Wayman.
Today I'll be spending a day with Calvin, an ex-cult member.
Calvin is on his shit.
Calvin, thank you for joining. Yeah, Calvin!
How many siblings did you have?
I have 44 siblings. I have more siblings than there are days in the month.
You had more siblings than there were presidents for a while.
Holy shit. You're right.
Tell me what your childhood was like.
You know why this is a hard question? It was normal because it's all I knew.
Yeah.
I have friends who grew up in like real cults. We had somebody on the show who has 44 siblings and 4 moms because he grew up in a polygamist like compound. You know what I mean? So like when I look at that, I'm like, okay, that's a cult.
Only been 5 years since you left the fundamentalist Mormon church. What inspired you to leave?
I'm starting to doubt my entire reality. And that's what led to this moment.
You actually have a voice memo that you recorded that very specific moment.
The thing that I haven't ever recorded on any way that I think I'm gonna say it here. But I guess just having the courage to say to myself out loud is I don't think I am going to stay.
That's when you actually say it.
As awesome as the people
Yeah, I can see the goosebumps.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, act like you know. It's going down. I'm your captain. It's going down.
There once was this boy who was born in a cult. Now, of course, since he was born in it, he had no idea that it was indeed a cult. And he lived his entire life being taught all the wonderful things about this cult, learning about the dangers of the outside world and how everyone else in the outside world was bad or wrong or evil. And somewhere along the way, this crack happened in his life where he started to realize that something was not quite right. And for the first time in his life, he started to question what it was that he was born into. He started to question the history and study how this cult had formed. He started to study and question his own psychology of what kept him inside the cult and what would keep him there. He examined the fear of what it meant to leave it. This boy then ended up traveling the world, meeting people from all walks of life, from Costa Rica to Israel to Thailand, London, Paris, ultimately coming to this point in his journey where he made the most difficult decision of his existence, and that was the decision to leave everything that he had ever known for the first 29 plus years of his life, to embark anew in a world outside of the cult, not just physically outside of it, but psychologically outside of the bounds that were surrounding him for his entire life long before that. That boy is me. I'm Calvin Wayman. I grew up in a cult. Many would call it Mormonism. It's also called fundamentalist Mormonism, which there are grades and variants around how culty this rabbit hole goes. And that's what I'm going to talk about. But I grew up in polygamy, so I have 1 dad, 4 moms, and so many siblings it doesn't even really register when I first say it out loud to people. And that is, how many siblings do you think someone can have with 1 dad and 4 moms? I often get like 12, 18, 20. Well, more than double that. I have 44 siblings. Honestly, that was the best part of my upbringing, having so many siblings. I grew up fundamentalist Mormon, and I went on this crazy journey to discover what I was in, this wild journey of coming out of it. I grew up in a small town where the cult resides, and now I live here in New York City. I just moved here 2 months ago. And the more I've shared my story and the more interested people have gotten, I've realized that I haven't had one consolidated central place to share my story, to share my perspective. And that is where this podcast, Cultured, is coming from. I love that this is something I'm finally doing. It's been on my heart for a long time. Yes, we're going to talk about how do cults form. We're going to talk about, fundamentalist Mormonism and regular Mormonism. But a major part of what I hope this show is personal. I want to share my experiences growing up, the way that I grew up, but I also want to share the very difficult journey of getting out. And also the things I'm experiencing now, being out in the real world, quote unquote. Maybe finding and talking about my perspectives of other cult-like behaviors in society. There's so much to unpack and uncover, from Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, to what created, the fundamentalist Mormon movement when the regular LDS Church decided to do away with polygamy. There are other cults out there like NXIVM. Of course, there's Scientology. There's things that are a little bit less religious that are still cult-like MLMs. Maybe even yoga studios. Who knows? Maybe you're in one. There's so many things that I want to discuss and talk about, and so a lot of it will be like this, where I'm doing solo episodes, diving deep on particular questions, particular topics, and sharing my story in one place, deeply detailed for the first time. I also want to bring on other people in other parts of culture. And the way this podcast will be different than any other cult-like podcast is, first of all, it's from an actual ex-cult member. There's many cults out there where people are just studying it, so I feel like that there's this insider perspective I have, having been born into it, but also having taken the very difficult steps to step out. At the same time, I want to look at it from my own personal lens with a lot of it, not just the overall group perspective of the organizations. We'll look at that too. We'll look super deep. How did this guy, Joseph Smith, convince a population that he had indeed seen the faces of God himself, Jesus himself, as two separate beings? How did he convince a population that he saw that he got this special book that nobody else saw with their physical eyes, that he then said he translated? How did it continue to exist? How did it go from back east to then making its way to Utah? How has it lasted this long? How has fundamentalist Mormonism been under this radar? How has this cult organization lasted generation after generation? And how do cults form in general? What keeps them intact? Are they always just from a, charismatic leader? Or are there other ways that they last? Is the group itself, the followers, do they have a role to play in perpetuating cult-like thinking and behavior? Again, where else does it show up in other parts of society? And so the thing I'm really excited about this podcast is this is going to be a journey. This is going to be my baby in some sense, my evolution, my own journey. There's so much that I feel like that I have to talk about and share and express that I've just held in to myself, or one-off conversations with my friends, or perhaps a therapist. Thank God for therapy. I want this podcast to be the outlet, the creative expression for my story and for my perspectives on life. And it's not just going to be heavy all the time. We're also going to get silly. I'm into, entertainment and creativity, comedy, all that sort of stuff. So we'll have a good time too. We're going to have a bunch of guests on the show as well. The thing I love about the show is just even in the name, cultured. Emphasis on the word cult, actually. But cultured. Yes, it's going to be about cults, but it's also going to be about culture. It's going to be about where we are right now in 2023 or 2024, 2025 and beyond. You know, the society that we all find ourselves in. I'll be bringing people on in different parts of culture. I also like that word cultured, which is, you know, trying new things, getting experience with other parts of society and other parts of culture, learning about things and people and societies that we didn't think of. And there's other ideas that I know I want to ultimately bring with this podcast, and I'm sure a lot of it will evolve over time. But what I hope to bring besides education and entertainment around cults, I also just hope to share perspectives that are new, that are sitting there almost dormant in a way that, you know, there's so many narratives that float around that we catch on Twitter and Facebook and like culturally acceptable to have. But then there are these other perspectives that just come from the individual. And I want to bring people on to share those unique perspectives. And what I really hope to do is create understanding of people that, you know, what makes people stay in cults. What I hope I also do is really spark this self-inquiry as to why we each as individuals think, act, or behave the way we do. What allegiances do we find ourselves connecting to, and why do we find ourselves connecting to those allegiances? Is it from us? Is it from these other invisible, you know, socialized pressures from parents or teachers or even our own weaponized compassion? Like, there's so many things that can explain why we are the way that we are, why we think the way we think, and that sort of thing. I also hope to build more bridges than I burn. There are some bridges that I think deserve to be burned. And there are plenty of shows that their entire existence is to expose and tear down organizations. And we'll do some of that. We'll do some of exposing. We'll do some tear downs. But what I also hope to do is to create this empathy, this understanding for each other, and just bring the world a little bit closer. So this is for sure going to be the shortest episode of the entire podcast. Again, I'm just going to call this episode 0 of Cultured. It's going to be a wide range of different conversations about cults, cultures, trying new things. Because that's the other thing, is I'm going to try new things and document things I've tried. I mean, I'm living here in New York City after being born in a cult and living in a small town. So there's a lot of culture shock that I experienced. It's really fun trying new foods, having conversations with different parts of society. There's a lot of things I get to try on a daily basis, and I want to share those new things that I try with you as the listeners. So buckle up. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining. If you're curious about cults, especially from the perspective of an ex-cult member, the perspective of somebody that has since left it and has stepped into the broader world and the way that they view things, you're in the right place. If you're curious about your own thinking, your own psychology, you're in the right place. If you're curious about, you know, just trying new things and broadening your own views and perspectives of the world, you're in the right place. And again, I know that just intuitively that this show will ultimately take a life of its own. There are some parts of it that I know that in episode 1, it's going to be different. On episode 10, episode 100, episode 500, you know, it will have an evolution over time. But thank you so much for being here. And if you want to be notified when new episodes drop, you can go to culturedpod.com. And there's a way to put in your information so that whenever there's a fresh episode that drops, you know, when I'm deep diving into my journey, growing up in a cult, what it's like to have 44 siblings, all in one house, by the way, 50 people, all in one house. Just put in your information, I'll notify you when new episodes drop. So I'm Calvin Wayman. Thank you so much for being here. The journey is just beginning. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the first big episode of Culture.
This is how you start a fresh rap with a new track. Put your seatbelts on.
Yeah, I grew up on a farm. So,
Yeah.
small family farm.
Small family?
Well, touche, brother. Touche.
Small family farm or small
right.
family farm?
Small farm, big family.
Sounds like the name of a hit TLC TV show.